13, 14 slides, so for sure I'm not talking 30 minutes, so we'll make it short. We'll make sure we are hearing what Bismarck has to say, which I'm sure will be interesting. I wanted to talk about what we have done on this regional economic outlook. Really, is just step out a bit from Nigeria, but helps put Nigeria in the context. So this is our regional economic outlook. We do that twice a year. We cover 45 Sub-Saharan Africa countries and try to look at what are the different trends, what are the recommendations, and some are similar, some are different. So I'll talk about the developments and the outlook, the macro policies, and very briefly about the response to the shocks. I'm looking forward to both Bismarck and Dr. Jumoke discussing, and then also opening the floor for questions and answers. I think it's more to hearing what are your concerns and some of the questions and discussion than just hearing us talk. So, where is the story on Sub-Saharan Africa? And I think 2016, after the terms of trade collapse, remains the same. And you can see here the story, the bifurcation here between resource-intensive countries. This includes oil and also mineral-intensive countries. So Nigeria is there, South Africa is there. And then you have the non-resource-intensive countries. So those are the oil importers and etc. And the growth here in per capita per GDP since 2016, it really has been sustained for that group of countries and has stayed sluggish for a group of countries in the resource-intensive, including because they have to be dealing with the terms of trade shock. And how they responded to the shock have also affected what is their path. So even when I talk about this bifurcation between these two groups of countries, even within this group of countries, there is quite a lot of heterogeneity. And there's a difference in the growth path because some have chosen different adjustment, others are more diversified, others have advanced more on doing business maybe, and Dr. Jumoke can talk to us about some of that. And you've seen that the three largest countries, which are the ones that are really driving Sub-Saharan growth, Angola, South Africa, and Nigeria. And you can see here, are lagging. Angola with negative growth, South Africa growth below 1%, and Nigeria growth between 2 and 2.5%, which is still negative per capita growth. I know some in the room here, every time I'm in Nigeria, say, oh, but we're still doing better than South Africa. Yeah, but you still need to be higher. I mean, the median, when you're looking at it, I mean, Nigeria is at the first 3 quarters, the numbers that came out is 2.2%. So, you know, our forecast is 2.3% for the year. I think it's still on track, depending on where agriculture and ICT and some of the sectors are going to come up. But the average for the region, the weighted average is 3.2. So 3.2% was in 2019, same growth rate as 2018. And then for 2020, for the region, we project 3.6%. Now, that growth, Nigeria is still at 2.3. For 2020, we're still projecting it at 2.5. So it's still not growing as fast as the others for a variety of reasons, including on some of the structural reforms and others. But it is picking up. But then, let's look at the other side. Then we have countries like Ghana, like Ethiopia, that are growing above 7%, right? Kenya is still at 5%. So this dichotomy across is quite present. Now, when we look at what has weighed on the outcome and the outlook, global factors were key. So we had a tightening of global market conditions at some point that also reduced some flows, that reduced some of the investment. But one factor that I want to pay particular attention to is the risk represented by global trade tensions. And you can clearly see it here. April 2018, $50 billion tariff, US imposes $50 billion tariffs on China. For China, you have this retaliatory tariff at that same time. US $200 billion tariff on $200 billion worth of goods in July. That again was followed by a China retaliatory. And as that happened, you can see clearly export growths of the countries in the region have gone down. and you can see that the volume of trade for the region as a whole, volume of trade globally, this is the orange line, has gone down almost to zero. So whatever happens externally will also impact countries. And it's just not just the demand is down, but for countries like Nigeria that also depend on natural resources, lower global demand, lower demand for these resource goods, oil, and that will impact the price also. So all of that is an impact on some of the revenues. Now, if some of you were at the annual meetings in October, you would find that there might have been some sort of risk or gloomy outlook. It's because when we look at our projections for, we cover about 45 Sub-Saharan countries, and 2/3 of those countries we revised growth down. Nigeria, we didn't, we stayed at 2.3. But we revised down the growth down for all those countries because of some of the trade tensions. Now, I want to point another statistics is that that's almost as large as the number of countries that we had to revise the outlook for when we had the 2014-15 terms of trade collapse in terms of the oil. Now, the difference is that the average revision now is about 0.3%. So much lower than what we had to do in 2014-15. But just want to say that it was really going in that direction. Now, what did that translate into is that a number of countries are converging or are able to increase their per capita GDP, are able to go to be in positive terms and trying to improve the developmental living, and some other countries we're still not there and it's lagging. And if you were to do a breakdown, 25 countries have a positive real GDP per capita growth, which is about 500 million people. There's 1.2 billion people in the countries we cover. That leaves 700 million people that are still not benefiting or having a real GDP per capita growth positive. Now, this is weighed by population, so I'm going to leave it as a surprise. I'm not going to tell you where Nigeria is, but I think you know, right? So this is weighed by population. But just to put things in perspective, over the next decade, what we are estimating is that 20 million new people will be joining the job market in the Africa Sub-Saharan region. These 20 million new labor entrants is these 20 million new jobs that need to be created through structural reforms, whatever reforms that are being pursued. Now, so far, we have been able to create only 10 million jobs. So we need to do a lot better than what we have been doing, because it's 10 million new jobs that are coming and that need to be created going forward. Now, what are the policies and some of the structural reforms? I'll just focus on 2 or 3 that I thought were critical. The report will talk about all the different policies in different areas, but I just want to focus on 2. One is on fiscal consolidation. Yes, you hear IMF and you say, oh, here they go with fiscal consolidation. But I think it's clear there's one thing that has happened since the terms of trade collapse. You see it for the oil, the resource-intensive countries, the non-resource-intensive countries. You had a terms of trade shock, they had to react. So you lose revenues, and guess what happened? Debt went up. So in most of the countries, you see that on average, debt is in the region about 55% of GDP, and has increased since 2016 in all cases. But what's new? We are back on a sustainable path. Most of the countries have a plan to try to reduce debt through fiscal consolidation, and has seemed to have stabilized. Some, obviously, the levels are much higher than others. I mean, if I were to put Nigeria here, debt has increased, but the level is way below the average for the region. Nigeria, we're talking about, even if we include the CBN overdrafts and others, we're talking about debt to GDP ratio that doesn't go beyond 27, 28% of GDP. That's including AMCON, overdrafts, etc. So that we are still way below what is happening in other countries for Nigeria. But in terms of stabilization, the path is the same because you need to reduce the financing constraint. This is what a lot of the Sub-Saharan countries are doing it. And then the question comes, how? And how, I think, for most of the countries, is to be revenue-driven. Revenue-driven because it allows the opportunity to also increase priority spending and try to have more growth-friendly fiscal consolidation. And in many countries in the region, including Nigeria, the revenue to GDP ratio is still low and the potential to increase revenue is still quite high. Now, in this regional economic outlook, there was one characteristic that we've seen in many of the countries where it was difficult to get the data. It's a new data set. We were able to get the data for 30 countries. Arrears that are quite prevalent in Africa. So Africa is not the only region that has, is one of the regions that may have the most compare relative to others. And in percent of GDP, it's about 3.3% of GDP. This is affecting the most low income, some that are less low income, mostly reflecting weaknesses in budget execution, in PFM, and that need to be fixed. Why are domestic arrears a problem? It impacts private sector, it impacts private sector investment, it impacts banks' asset quality, which will also impact how they are lending. So the chapter we have there is also focusing on that particular issue. In the case of Nigeria, there are also domestic arrears. And the domestic arrears here, some of them to contractors, some of them to fuel operators. The government is trying to clear them through the promissory notes. That is part of trying to restore confidence in the system by the private sector and making sure that the stock of domestic arrears are being reduced through better PFM, but also clearing the previous stock is also important. And I think that's part of the strategy of many governments, including Nigeria. So that's one policy that we wanted to flag, which would also help in terms of growth. Another one that we try to look at is what is the status of competition in many of the countries in the region. And Dr. Zumweke may talk later about doing business and helping the regulatory environment. All of that is part of this. You need a right competition policy. Why does it matter? Today, if you were to look at the average per capita growth in the region, we're at about 1%. If you were to increase the level of competition to the top 75%, if you were to look at the distribution, you will get another increase of 1 percentage point per capita, which means you are doubling your per capita GDP with greater competition. What are the channels? You're going to get higher private investment. We found higher non-oil exports and labor productivity that is driving that channel. And for welfare, it's also positive. Why is it positive? Because you also get prices that are being reduced, and you've seen it in many industries where it's clothes, health, food, etc. Across the region. The greater the competition, the lower those prices were. So that's another channel. We talked about competition policy and having the right regulatory environment to encourage that. By the way, when we look at some of the markup, which is one of the measures of competition, we find that in many countries that markup has increased, so saying that competition has been reduced. And that has been found also for both South Africa and Nigeria, and we are talking about that in that particular report. So how then do we respond to the downside risk and mitigate, and what are the policies going forward? And here I'll have to just put a caveat. You know, sometimes the IMF, you always say, it's always the same responses. No. This depends on country characteristics and where countries find themselves in the cycle. Where are they in the growth cycle? Where are they on have space to use monetary policy to try to encourage growth? Some of the countries have that. Do you have space to loosen fiscal policy well, then you have to look at how sustainable your debt level is. And in most of the countries, there is little space, so fiscal consolidation, revenue-driven is there, and then you may have room to ease monetary policy if inflation is low. If it is not, then that room is more constrained. Then you may have to both use monetary and fiscal consolidation to create some of the space, and monetary to keep inflation in check. And accompanying this, obviously, will also be the structural reforms, labor market, product market, all of that, to try to move some of that growth up. I keep coming back to this, and I'll finish with this. You have to look at where the country's balance sheets are, where they are standing in terms of banking sector vulnerabilities, in terms of more appetite to take credit risk or not, inflation growth, the fiscal position. All of that is going to determine what will be the right policy to be taken. And I promise I'll be less than 30 minutes, so I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ami. That was about 16 minutes, so you saved us a lot of time. Before I invite Bismarck for his presentation, we need to, yes, we kindly request that everybody on this reserve table should please take a copy of the report and come forward for a photograph. Yes, so that officially this has been presented. Let me get mine as well. So we'll do this in just 1 minute and then move on.
We'll have that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We have it in the right side. Which camera do you look at? All of them.
Okay. So thank you very much. Next we move on to the presentation or remarks by the CEO of the financial derivatives company that we all know very, very well. The agenda says 15 minutes, but I'm sure it's going to be in less than 15 minutes. Thank you.
I mean, thanks for that, that interesting presentation. And my takeaway is the similarity between the three big economies and the other economies in Africa. Also, the question of fiscal stability and consolidation on one hand, the arrears to contractors and others, whether they're interest-bearing or not, because even if you issue promissory notes, one thing is the arrears, and what is the true cost. If I know that I'm not going to get paid, I'll front-load my contract so that the cost of production of anything becomes much higher. Then, thirdly, you talked about encouraging competition. And competition obviously makes markets more perfect and reduces margins. And imperfect markets are usually products of a rent-seeking economic model. And so you would have a lot of interest groups saying, no, let's close down things, let's block things, let's close the borders, let's do this. Because those are anti-competitive moves. And so the trade-off between encouraging competition and protecting domestic industry is an issue that philosophically policymakers have to come to terms with. And so it is very important. And I was looking at the bifurcation thing, and just yesterday we did an analysis, very good analysis of Nigeria, and we said the best places to live, where they had the lowest misery index. And the 5 states, and I state here again, number 1 is Osun State, number 2 is Oyo State, number 3 is Katsina State, number 4 is Lagos, and number 5 is Ondo State. None of these are oil producing. None of these are oil producing. And all we did was to take inflation plus unemployment in those states and come up with that ranking. So it kind of falls in line with resource rich and resource intensive and productivity. So natural world economy and produce world economy. And then if you go back 10 years and see what those states spent on education, the investment in education 10 years earlier or 15 years earlier, and the resultant effect. Also, something about some of these states having proximity with the borders. I don't know whether that's any cause and effect, but it's something that we need to think about. But having said that, the fundamental question is that if we are growing at 2.3%, and in the Q3, oil growth was 6.3 or so percent, and non-oil was 1 point. Yet oil revenues, and just talking about oil revenues in Q3, capital importation also came down, reserves also declined. Then what's going on here, right? And so it calls for, so you could have growth with lower revenues, and those oil elastic sectors, because the oil revenues come in and you use that to drive the other sectors, begin to suffer if the oil revenues begin to go down. So what are the linkages that you have to have? So it brings you back to the whole thing is that structural changes are necessary to get growth above a particular level. The revenue, or the revenue to GDP ratios and all of these things are interesting ratios, but in the presence of slow growth or suboptimal growth, let me put it this way, because potential GDP is still also growing faster than real GDP, so there's a recessionary gap, there's no question about that. And so if oil production did not increase sharply because we were cheating on the OPEC quota, then what would have happened to the other sectors, right? So I use the term that we dodged the bullet, okay? And some good things are happening. So people are beginning to think about how do we address this? How do we deal with incremental or tactical issues, and how do we deal with structural and strategic issues in terms of economic policy? How do we ensure that we can do things? If the ERGP target 2020-21 was 7%, and we're supposed to be at about 4% now, and we are at 2%, then we have to do something. You know, it's like I always tell some of my colleagues that, look, if I take a mock exam in November and the final exam is in March, and I come up with a score of 20%, then my dad has to make a decision about whether do we change the lesson teacher, do we change school, or do I just take the exam fee and push it for the next year so I don't lose the exam fee and lose everything. So it's that kind of, that's the conversation Nigerian policymakers are dealing with. So it's as easy as that. So having said that, there are a couple of things using, I think I mean refer to a question of using monetary policy to support growth. Yes, but growth principally is a fiscal issue, and I think yes, you can support it or you can coordinate it. And dealing with inflation, we had that conversation as well. Dealing with inflation and not giving up growth. It's not a binary choice, but it is a choice that which would you give priority. And then we looked at some of the monetary policy decisions about, for liquidity management, Nigerian individuals, corporates, and others are not allowed to buy automobiles because automobiles are for liquidity management, actually. So that means that since that decision, interest rates have effectively come down by about 300 to 400 basis points. So that's good in terms of if that can be transmitted into lending, and lending can be transmitted into activities that will bring growth. But if not, the marginal propensity to save, because savings is a function of interest, all right? So when the marginal propensity to save actually declines, the marginal propensity to consume increases, because it's consumption plus savings that gives you a total income. Then underneath the marginal propensity to consume is the marginal propensity to import. So when you do that analysis crudely, the law of unintended consequences begins to stare at you. So I think that's something that we have to think about, except you're sequencing it in other ways. You do this and then you do that. But if external sector vulnerability, because the way it starts is at fiscal consolidation, and you look at the fiscal thing, you now look at the growth and see how much of the growth is being funded by debt and other things. Then it begins to show up in your balance of payments. So are there external sector vulnerabilities that are going to be manifest? And if so, option A, further restrictions. Option B, adjustments of any type. And option C, do nothing or just borrow some more because there's room for debt. So I think that's, you've got to look at the things from a prism, but everybody say what's going to happen to the currency, what's going to happen to Naira, and all that. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is that what's going to happen to growth and what price are we willing to pay. Definitely, we can't, the whole idea is that it's about infinite needs and finite resources. I think that's key. So knowing what we cannot afford and what we can is, and that thinking is what is dominating. There's a sense of awareness, one. Awareness is different from urgency. And so being aware that something is coming is not the same thing as knowing that which is urgent. So, like Abiola says, that no bird tells the other bird that a stone is coming. Right? So once you see the stone, you take off and everybody takes off. So awareness, urgency, and then actions. I think I've touched on as far as I can go at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because we know you will not be around for the Q&A, so we'll not let you go until you've answered some questions. So I've got two questions for you, and then we'll take two from the audience, and then we'll move on with the rest of the presentations. The two questions I have for you, the first one is to do with the debt profile for Nigeria. And I see from the IMF report that the conclusion is Nigeria is not doing badly. But we also know that we struggle to service our debt. So my first question to you is, do you think that Nigeria has a debt crisis? Or is it a revenue problem? Or is it both? The second question I have for you is to do with the role of the monetary authorities. And I also saw from the IMF report that the biggest room we have to intervene in terms of economic policies is around the monetary space. And someone was saying jokingly recently that CBN is doing so much in Nigeria that very soon we'll be inviting them to settle quarrel between husband and wives. So my question to you is, what's your take on this, and how do you think we can accomplish policy coordination between the monetary particularly and the fiscal authorities?
I think Jumake was in one or two of those meetings we had way back. There's goal alignment before. You cannot coordinate what is not aligned. I don't know how many of you were Tottenham Hotspur last night. The first half was totally misaligned. Second half was aligned and coordinated, and victory came. So there has to be alignment and confluence of beliefs and philosophy. There are schools of thought that believe strongly in economic patriotism and things. There are schools of thought that believe in a mixed economic model as an interim stage, and then there are schools of thought that believe in a free market economy. Some people say there's no free market economy. Some say there's no Robinson Crusoe economy. So you end up probably with a mixed model. But if you read the Bloomberg Business Week year ahead thing, and they said in 1990 or so, the Chinese economy was about maybe 10 or 15% of the US economy, and then it has grown to almost 70%. However, if you repeated all the things that the Chinese did 30 years ago, 40 years ago as a developing economy today, you will not achieve what they achieved because the environment and things have changed. So, holding strongly to some old models which were successful in the past, you end up with suboptimal results. You will achieve something, it's necessary but not sufficient. Right? So the question of goal alignment, coordination, and allowing monetary policies about stability of prices and probably to some extent rate. You use a framework, monetary policy framework of inflation targeting, explicit inflation targeting with an anchor called the interest rate, or you could use the exchange rate as the anchor to bring about stability, financial stability. Fiscal policy, on the other hand, has all types of cyclical and other measures. So you cannot substitute one for the other. Monetary policy is typically tactical, while fiscal policy is strategic and structural. You use one to complement the other. And what happened in 2008, where because of the global crisis, everybody came together in a coordinated manner and that cannot be, you can't run a hospital based on ER, that was an ER situation, right? So we cannot make that the model. In other words, we will still come back to the basic principles of fiscal policy and monetary policy and do that. This is an interim, this is a transition, the way I see it, and because of the way people are sensitive to this things, people are going to personalize what are philosophical arguments. So it's best to just leave it at, I think there'll be greater alignment, there'll be greater coordination, and the results will be better than what we have. Will the results be optimal? Depends on how clinical you want to be about doing something transformational. Okay? One. Now the second question was about debt crisis and revenue problem. Crisis is when things are chronic and acute and all sorts of things. So it is correct that you don't have a debt crisis. But the question of the revenue problem is incomplete in the sense that there are other problems, the problems of poverty, problems of productivity, and so it's not a binary that debt revenue. No, it's not that. And what you use the revenue for is extremely important. What kind of multiplier? So the government expenditure and government investment multiplier is much lower than a private sector multiplier. Okay? The difference between a flow of wealth and a stock of wealth is a different story. So you have go and collect the money that was stolen and all that. when you finish that, then you will not go, then you go and rob somebody. So it's understanding this. These are very, very fundamental and basic. This is what 11-year-olds who are starting economics know. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel because of that. It's just accepting what is truth. One, that's why I said awareness. Right? After awareness, you now decide how urgent are these things. Because doing nothing has a major, major consequence. So once you accept it, then you now need to take steps. And I think we are at that stage where we are awareness, there's some sense of urgency, and then it's about taking action about it. And so I think there's some flicker of hope at the end of the tunnel. And that tunnel, hopefully, it's not a very long tunnel. Thank you.
Okay, so please stand there.
Yeah, I'll take 2 more questions.
We take 2 from the audience and 1.
Bismarck, my name is Austin Okere of the Also Leadership Academy. I'm also an entrepreneur in residence at Columbia Business School. We keep hearing about border closure as if the border was open to everything and we've closed it and nothing is going in or out. What exactly has changed and what is all this border closure about and how does it impact on the economy? Thank you.
My sense is that the border closure serves 2 purposes. One is for statistics, you want to know how much of economic activity is within this, how much economic activity, so that you know how much petrol you really consume, how much of that. And the second part of it is that it gives you time to assess the size indirectly of the informal economy. Having said that, the difference between gross national product and gross domestic product, what foreigners earn in Nigeria will be taken away from what Nigerians earn, and then what Nigerians earn overseas, and so you can end up with 2 different data points. But having said that, you see, there were comments as well on unnecessary imports. Unnecessary means that it has no price, that nobody, if you are willing to pay for it, then it has to have, there must be some utility to that particular commodity. That's why, so what happens is that there are 2 things that price equilibrium will do. One is the difference between the currency values of the 2 countries. The second one is the amount of duty, and then the third is so that's what it is. So why would I, as an economic agent, see that I can buy my maize, or I can sell my maize across the border and get a higher price? That's from Nigeria, sell maize there. Or how is it that I can import that maize across the border after bribing the customs and doing that, and I still come up with a profit that is more? These are perfectly rational economic agents making economic decisions. They do not see it as a crime. They're not bringing narcotics or bombs or anything. They're just bringing in products which the market wants at a price which the market can afford. So you could ask yourself the fundamental question, how much of this market, and the more the barriers, the more the premium, because you're basically, what you are doing is you are actually just increasing the cost of it. The new cars that were imported into this country compared to the Tokumbo cars, since the law that took the duty and this into 75%, you can see for yourself. Are they producing cars in Nigeria that people can buy? I'm not so sure. I don't see them, right? I go to government offices, I hardly see any car made in Nigeria there. So you ask yourself, is the policy achieving the desired objective within the time frame you want to achieve it. So, Milton Friedman said there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. And when he was saying that, he had nothing to do. Mr. Friedman died a few years ago, so he couldn't have been around to say it because of Nigeria, right? And he said that if the government is put in charge of running the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there will be a shortage of sand. That's what he said. Right? So, you have to understand that the border closure is anti-competitive. It has achieved the purpose. We closed the border in 1984 for 21 days to allow us to change our currency, right? But after a while, people would look for ways around it. And I told somebody that the Yoruba word for smuggler is called firewall, which means that you go under, you use your chest to go under the wire to go out. That lexicon was made not recently. So smuggling is as old as when the language was. So economics is behavioral, right? And so I think we need to understand that the moment you close something, right, the price, people will pay for it if they need it. Everywhere I go, in every restaurant I go, there's basmati rice, there's this, I don't know where it's coming from. Except they are using drones to bring it in, but... So, I submit that as a free market economist, that people will pay the effective price for what they want. Nobody will pay for street lights, right? Because you cannot differentiate between who is using it and who is not using it. We know that, right? Okay.
Okay, thank you. And we also have a father rights everywhere we go. So it gets better. I'll take the second and the last question for Bismarck. I want to see whether there's a lady who wants to ask a question. And if not, I can see a hand here from a gentleman. Oh, this lady, okay. Sorry. I apologize.
Good morning, my name is Irene Ubani from Plus TV Africa. Alright, would you suggest that the stability in our Naira valuation to the dollar is artificial, or what's your take on that? Because, I mean, our reserves are still declining here. Thank you.
Again, the price of the product is a product of is a product of the structure of the market. So, is it 360? Is it 315? Is it 200? Even if it's fair value at 8 o'clock, it may not be fair value at 9 o'clock. So what we should be asking is, what market structure will produce a price? Because once the price is in disequilibrium, there's a gap, either a demand gap or a supply gap, and that gap will be bridged by all sorts of, right? You can't do anything about it. And people go, oh, it's 360, no, it's 350, it's 3. What is that? That's a multiple choice question. Is it 360? You can get distinction in a multiple choice question just by guessing, and But if you have to derive an exchange rate mechanism, there are many things that go into exchange rate determination, from the interest rate, inflation differential, terms of trade, balance of trade, flows. So I don't think it makes sense to begin to speculate on what the true value is. Let's come up with a system that works. And how many countries do you go to that people are flashing currency in front of you at the airport, come and buy? That itself means there's a gap. You don't need any further evidence. Why would anybody be offering you? Right? So once we establish that, then we can decide that because it may be because of fear, it may be almost impossible, not impossible, it's difficult to convince people that a unified exchange rate is the most efficient way of running on the foreign exchange market because of that, then what steps are you going to take towards beginning to reduce that disparity? So the truth is that the currency, structure of the currency market and the emerging rate can be considered to be work in progress. That's all I can say at this point. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so even though I recognize my friend over here, we'll try and pass that on to the rest of the speakers so we can allow you to go. So let's appreciate Bismarck. Thank you very much. All right, so moving on, we are going to invite now to give us some remarks from the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council. Our dear Dr. Jumoke Oduwole in about 15 minutes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. These economists just make me tired. From inside. Just make me tired. But as a lawyer, I can agree without conceding. So that is well. Yes, I can agree without conceding, but I want to remind everybody some key facts about this economy. Because I think even as we fix the economy, we shouldn't forget where we are and who we are. And many of you are economists, and many of you speak to investors, potential, current, and I'd like us to remember this. Because this is why we need to fix it. And this is why there's urgency. I spoke to some civil servants in Lagos last week. We had a technical workshop for them on the business climate reforms. And I said to them that if Lagos gets it, Nigeria gets it.
Sure.
And if Nigeria gets it, Africa gets it. So if Lagos gets it, Africa gets it. So, ERGP, third pillar, competitiveness. These are what we had said we would do, clearly behind. Should we defer the exam fees? We know the challenges that investors have. There's been quite some work. I think many of you would agree that since 2016, we've been working on some of these areas. My intervention focuses on SMEs and the potential, even the actual dividends being realized across sectors is already significant. That is why the planes are continually full coming into Nigeria, regardless of everything we know and we hear. But it just makes us know that we have a lot to do. You talked about tech, you talked about agri. The potential is endless. These are current, and you can imagine if we can get it right for them, where we will be. So the business climate intervention fits very squarely with the priorities of the administration: security, anti-corruption, and the economy. We know why it's important. We know the link with the GDP. Countries that have their business climate thriving, there's a direct correlation, so it's not speculation. I think there's an alignment. As Bismarck was saying, is there awareness, is there alignment, is there urgency? I think on business climate reforms, I can confidently say that we have that in this administration. So the ERGP competitiveness pillar is divided into two parts, and I'm sure you know this. The first part on hard infrastructure, roads, power, rail, broadband, airports, seaports. And the second half, which is perhaps for the first time a systemic intervention on regulatory, bureaucratic bottlenecks. We focus on reduction of cost and time, and we focus on making sure that there's more transparency and information in the system. We do this by working on people issues, processes, and infrastructure. The presidential enabling, first of all, how many people have heard about the PEBEC? Can you show? Okay, so I need to go through. So the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council was established by Mr. President in July of 2016. It's chaired by the Vice President, and it has the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment as the Vice Chair. About 13 ministers in all, from Police Affairs, Information, Foreign Affairs, of course, Finance, Power, Works and Housing, Transport, everyone that needs to be in the room. We have high-level representation from the National Assembly, from the judiciary, from state governments, and from the private sector. So it's a holistic intervention that meets monthly and reports to the Federal Executive Council on a quarterly basis. As Special Advisor to the President, now on ease of doing business, started off as Senior Special Assistant to the President on Industry, Trade and Investment, but for the priority that in the second level and next level were given to this, I was more focused on this task. So I'm privileged to coordinate the affairs of the Secretariat and implement the mandate of the Council. We took the World Bank DB Index, which is the leading doing business index globally, as an empirical tool to focus on. So you saw the mandate is twofold. We want to improve the perception of the business climate, and we want to actually improve indeed with impact the business climate. So going with DB, from 2007, we had a consistent decline up till we hit rock bottom in 2015. When we came in, we studied the system, we studied global best practice, and we developed a homegrown best fit for the Nigerian economy, which has been producing notable results. It's not a sprint, it's more of a marathon, not a sprint, but systemically, we've been going year on year. How do we do this? A lot of collaboration. We partner with across the board, really. We work with development partners, we have technical assistance, we have technical assistance from private sector, PwC, Deloitte, P&G, We've had a lot of support, NESG. Public and civil servants, we engage with them. So the Secretariat is basically a transformation office. We review processes and brainstorm and challenge the status quo. Why are there these number of processes? What are the people issues? How can we reduce the number of processes? What infrastructure gaps do you have? What is global best practice? What would work in Nigeria? If we can't go to 100 immediately, can we get to 50? We test the hypothesis. We engage constantly with private sector. Right now we're on a subnational tour. Private sector gives a lot of feedback, either collectively or organized private sector. LCCI, MAN, NASMIN, NASIMA. Individual companies send messages, we have a problem. We distill into systemic interventions, prioritizing SMEs, because of course they're about 58% of GDP. But labor-wise, about 80% of jobs. What have we achieved since 2016? We have a national action plan that is a sort of copyrighted for Nigeria. We've had 4 so far, and the 5th one will be in Q1 of 2022. This is an intervention that we start our reform cycles in November and end them formally at the end of April, flush with the World Bank cycle. But we have a number of reforms that are non-DB related, like entry and exit of people, trading within Nigeria, our regulatory reform project, our legislative interventions. We also try to have a bit of a carrot for the public servants. We have had 2 editions of the PEBEC Awards. The first executive order of the administration was on transparency and efficiency of public service. That executive order is tracked on a monthly basis, and we released our 2nd annual report. Some of the gains that we've had have been driven by technology, improvement of processes, legislative reforms, and then interventions at the state level. So for instance, with technology, we've automated the visa on arrival process. The incorporation of companies, regular companies, is now 24 hours. Visa on arrival is now 48 hours. It's actually an electronic visa. Process improvement, several improvements across. First of all, every MDA has an up-to-date website, which is the responsibility of the head of the agency to make sure that the information is current, accurate, and is respected by their officers. Legislative reforms, we partnered with the National Assembly. We passed a number of legislations, including the Companies and Allied Matters Bill of 2019, which didn't make assent before the end of the last administration, but will be represented shortly. We've partnered with the state government since 2017 because at the end of the day, businesses are domiciled at state level, but the policies and the processes of the federal government do affect businesses disproportionately. The executive order has on the report side, on the report feedback side, a report.gov.ng. It's a portal and an app you can download on your phones to make complaints and to give feedback to government agencies. We have 20, the top 20 that have the most interface with business community. That's the 2 annual reports for the executive order, and we have the annual report for the project. The second one is due out. We're changing our reporting cycle to the end of October. Some of the impact, actually, financial derivatives, as part of their CSR, took it upon themselves to look into the impact, empirical impact of our work. This was done last year, so it's a bit dated now. But in the center there, you see that Nigeria has moved up 39 places since we started the intervention, and we've been recognized as a top 10 most improved economy for the 2nd time in 3 years by the World Bank. These are some of the agencies that we work with. Those are some of the results. We also, Nigeria is one of only 18 countries that has a subnational doing business report. And we worked with state governments unanimously. Everyone across the board got on board by partnering with the National Economic Council, also chaired by the Vice President. And we had 32 states moving in the right direction, almost 50 reforms implemented at the subnational level. And we continue to partner very closely with state governments. At the end of October, some of you may have heard, we moved up 15 places to 131. More granularity on the areas. Some are at state level, like land reforms, dealing with construction permits, registering property. So we've been working with the state government teams. And some are just really federal government. We also are supporting with AFCFTA readiness for Nigeria, issues like smuggling. So the work is actually broader than doing business alone. It's actually a full business climate reform intervention. So things like APAPA gridlock, closure of the borders. I shouldn't set myself up for funny questions, but you get the idea. You get the idea. A bit on the subnational. Apart from DB, we also decided to have a homegrown subnational intervention. this is an interesting slide. It shows the top most improved states. You see Kaduna at the top there. We had Enugu, Lagos, Abia, and Anambra. So the Southeast was really not doing very well at all, but last year the governors really took up the challenge, and you had that region as the most improved region. But generally, just yesterday, we were with the World Bank Group in Abuja and had a workshop on subnational reforms, which went very well, and I was there. And we're going to see a lot more in a systemic approach to making sure that Nigeria's business climate is moving in the right direction. To achieve that, so I should just mention that through the NEC, the state governors are replicating this model, and we have a technical working group, and we do have some private sector representation there as well. So this technical working group, which was inaugurated in 2017, last year we decided to have a baseline subnational survey carried out, which will be done in Q1 of 2020. Because the governors felt that there were areas that they wanted businesses to know about that the DB report doesn't cover, like infrastructure and security, skills and labor, workforce readiness. Of course, the regulatory environment is what is covered, and then access to information. The idea is to make sure that no region is left behind. So we've been engaging with stakeholders, which we have done since 2016, on a quarterly rolling basis, but we started a tour called Alliteration. It's a LIT tour, that's the acronym, to listen, implement, and track. And the idea, the tour is specifically targeted at young entrepreneurs. So we have them talk about the reforms that have aided them. As Tyrell said, there's been improvements, so the discussion is more nuanced. When we first started, the trust deficit was so high, but at least in the last 2-3 years, the discussion is a lot more vibrant as we gain credibility by implementing reforms. So the literation has gone to it started with a kickoff event in Lagos, then we went to Imo State, we went to Kwara, we went Ekiti last week. We're going to the south to Akwa Ibom at the beginning of December. In January we'll be in Jigawa, Abuja, Jigawa, and then Bauchi, and of course Kano. So Lagos, Abuja, and Kano are staples on the menu, and then one state in the region hosts the region. Apart from the stakeholder engagement, we also have a technical workshop alongside where we discuss with the public and civil servants. The idea basically is that we need to institutionalize the reforms. Collaboration is key, and it's one of continuous improvement. I'll leave this because the economists have done a lot, but you basically have a reference document. The slides, I prepared quite a few slides that I'd like circulated, just so you have a vibrant, like a holistic idea of what the government has been doing, what the economy is, even though we hear the impact and we know we have a lot of work to do. Don't you ever, 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 ever forget why you should invest in Nigeria. Thank you.
So thank you very much. You know, each time you listen to Dr. Jumoke, you can always feel the passion of what he's trying to do, and that's very commendable. Nigerians, like, you know, human beings all over the world, we always ask for more. So whenever we ask for more, it's not to say we do not acknowledge what is being done, we just want more. So I'm going to invite the CEO of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Mr. Lawi Jayona, for some remarks in about 5 minutes, and then we go into the Q&A. So we'll be on time, so just bear with us.
Fantastic presentation. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. I like the note that Jumoke ended it, why invest in Nigeria? And so about 2 weeks ago, we had a closed-door meeting with some investors in Nigeria and those that drive investment flows. And we asked a few questions, and they'd say, please tell us, why is it drying up? what do we need to do to actually open the pipes, to allow it to work? Again, given the fact that if you listen, I talked about 3 years, particularly navigating uncertainties. We see uncertainties all over the world. And what we tell people is that people will only come to you if you are attractive. So they gave us 3 key things: instability in a policy environment and policy direction. Sometimes people say they are confused, they don't know what direction is. So what we're telling government therefore is that there is a need to do the right signaling. And well, I'm glad when Bismarck said some coordination work is going on, and sooner rather than later we see the right signaling. The second thing they talked about, uncertainty around exchange rate. Which markets, which market conditions are good? And I've really told people, I said, well, it's exchange rate, but it's about prices, the role of price. Whether you're doing for exchange rate, whether you're doing for fuel, you're doing it for power, or whatever. What's the role of price? And I heard when we talked about shutting down our borders. So we shut it down, we're able to know how much fuel do we actually consume in Nigeria. But after that, what next? What's the role of price? The third is they talk about multiple taxations and heavy manual of investment policies, procedure, and business regulatory environment. And I commend what Chuka and our team are doing, but what I say we can still make it a lot better and easier. So for us, few things that we take into government and train them that it's important for us to have clear direction, policy direction, and signal the right environment for money to come in. And we're seeing those are doing well in the sub-region. Usually when I present this, I know for course he wants us to look at the entire sub-region, but then always because we're Nigerians, we look at Nigeria. But if you look at what Ghana is doing, what Ethiopia is doing, the question is that they are not doing anything that is not in the economic text. And how do we get ourselves doing it? So it's about awareness, it's about knowing the urgency of the time and the need to do something. And so, for us, key priority is let's deal with macroeconomic stability. Let's continue to try and see what we can do to improve the business environment. And I've challenged my friend and said, there are some low-hanging fruits in this ease of doing business thing that we're doing. Now we need to deal with the big issues. Customs, since I was young, we were talking about single window. And we move from Ascoda, single window, we're still there. What do we need to do around that? People talk about power being the problem in Nigeria. Yeah, it's a power, but then if we pay the right prices, the power will come. And we see it in Lagos. Some estates very recently went into agreement with the Ikeja, and they get 22 hours of unbroken light. They pay twice what the official 21 Naira is, and they get 24 hours. So effectively, they've saved money. Pollution is gone down, whether it's noise or air or whatever. So the belief therefore is that if you allow right pricing, some of these problems that look as insurmountable, we'll deal with them. We need to do whatever is important to allow both domestic private capital and foreign private capital to flourish. It is evident we don't have the resources to run. And of course, revenue mobilization will do, but as we talk about revenue, we're putting pressure on government to look at expenditure. And I was glad when I talked about the multiplying effect of government expenditure vis-a-vis private expenditure. We're not seeing the impact. The value for money is not there. And we need to see what we can do to ensure prudent management, debt sustainability, and how do we deal with widening fiscal deficit. So, it's 5 minutes, and I won't stand between you and the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for keeping it brief and straight to the point. I was listening to the radio, I think it was this morning or maybe yesterday, and Flo Lumumba, this anti-corruption guy from Kenya, said, we seem to always give the impression that we have to close the border to stop it from being porous. And it's funny, you can leave your border open and it doesn't have to be porous, and I think I agree with it. So as we close the border, we should try and work towards fixing the underlying problems. Otherwise, we just maybe back to where we stopped. The second point I want to make, and because the CEO of the NESG touched on revenue matters, is my view is always that because individually we have become like a government, we're actually paying taxes to ourselves in addition to the one we pay to government. If you put it all together, your tax rates are one of the highest in the world.
Yeah.
Because when you pay taxes to yourself to take care of yourself, it's the most expensive way to run your life. It will cost you far more to build 1 million boreholes for 1 million households than it will cost you for 1 million households to pay taxes to government to provide potable water. I know there's a trust issue that we don't trust government, but the solution cannot be that we continue the way we have been doing things. All right, I'm going to go straight away to the Q&A session. I'd like to invite Amit and Amin and then Dr. Jumoke to please come forward. I will start by asking you one question each, and then I'll take questions from the audience. Okay, and the CEO of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Yes. All right, thank you very much. So, I'm going to start with lady first. So, we do know that the PEPEC has been doing a lot, and it's interesting to see the report, which you promised to share with us. The IMF report mentioned competition, competitiveness, and growth. And I'd like to focus my question to you on competitiveness. Because I know that competitiveness for me is how can we be competitive both domestically as well as globally. Some of the reforms and initiatives are to do with government agencies and regulation and all of that. My question is whether we still have low-hanging fruits everywhere and it's taking us too long to pluck them. Because I know the ones that are not low-hanging sometimes are more difficult. And I'll share two examples with you. I was told just a couple of days ago. One of it is the ongoing e-registration for expatriates. And I have people complaining to me that you go there and you spend the whole day and you don't even get the opportunity to be registered. On one hand, this is giving us a wrong image because these are foreigners, for example. And that process doesn't seem to be working well. The second one is to do with CAC. And this person said to me, there's a director who is based in India, and they signed a document, and the CAC said, no, we don't like the electronic version. You need to sign physically and send through Korea to Nigeria. They did and said, oh, it looks irregular. So you have to do another one and repeat that process. So the question is, what can we do to quickly get over these nuances and move to bigger issues?
Thank you very much for that. So the Executive Order EU1 is meant to drive or is driving transparency and efficiency in public service. So it applies to all ministries, departments, and agencies, but the PEPEC tracks about 55 priority MDs that have direct interface with the private sector. Now, what my team does, we identify reforms and track them. So we work, we implement, and we start tracking. We don't do all at the same time, and it's sort of demand-driven. So if the report gov.ng is used for complaints, that's why we try to publicize it and talk about it. Like the two issues that you've mentioned, both of them can be reported on report.gov.ng, and then we'll follow up directly with the agency. So we do add new reforms from time to time, which we then work on. But it's important that we also have the engagement with private sector to throw up those areas where the shoe is pinching, and we can then shine the spotlight on it. Consequence management is pretty important. The rigor of tracking and monitoring is really important also to make sure that reforms don't unwind. We've had experiences where we completed reforms and 4 months later they're unwinding. We've had some of those at the airports, at the seaports, and in some agencies. So we really need the help, and that's why I was emphasizing collaboration. We need the reporting from private sector, whether it's individual cases or just systemic issues, which we can then bring to the fore.
Okay, thank you very much. So we all need to work together to make this sustainable. I would direct my next question to Amin. Your report spoke about external headwinds affecting Africa. In particular, the threat of rising protectionism, reversal in capital inflows, as well as slowdown in China and the Euro area. And it seems to be almost all negative. And somebody says, if you just want to have a bad day, listen to economists. So my question to you is, are there any tailwinds for Africa and Nigeria in particular?
Thank you very much. Well, when you talk about economists, you always hear on one hand and on the other hand, right? So this is on one hand. Then on the other hand, as some of these economies work and push on reform implementation, so on domestic, they can also push up the growth potential, increase productivity. You know, we talked about competition. Even as a lot of these countries try to increase their buffers, you get some of the investments that are coming in. I mean, if you look at some of the countries in the region, you have some where FDI is coming in, even though there's a lot of liquidity out there, and it's all those countries fighting to try to bring the liquidity. What's important is to bring the long-term investment coming for productive spending, and I think by taking the right measures, I would say that's a positive that is happening in many countries. All of those factors, I can also make it work the other way, right? I mean, you could have market conditions that on one you could have Europe or others where growth is higher. We've seen that, you know, if you resolve the trade tensions with China, then we've seen also some of the oil price and others going back up for countries. And again, you have two tails here, because I am the mission chief for Nigeria, but we're also talking about other countries. So for oil exporters, a higher oil price is positive. For the oil importers, it's the opposite, right? I mean, so yes, there is a lot of it. I don't want to just focus on the external, because on the external, there's not a lot that the country can do, right? But what the country can do is mitigate the risks from the external. And to mitigate, that means you need to have the right policies. My friend Larry talked about the right macroeconomic stability, the right macroeconomic framework, the right policies in terms of clarity of policies, and if you try to build those buffers to mitigate if those downside risks materialize. So I think I would like to, the focus to be, how can the countries mitigate if those risks were to materialize? Because I think that is what, because it's very difficult for you to count on external. And let me rephrase it maybe the other way. If you count on too optimistic and external, then when that doesn't materialize, then you're left with having to come up with how to deal with that. So I think it's important to have the mitigating measures.
All right, thank you very much. My next question will go to the CEO of the NESG. I particularly like the section in the IMF report on domestic arrears, causes, symptoms, and cures. It was very interesting for me to read. And one of the things they identified there, you know, apart from the impact on the private sector, banking sector, and the fiscal policy space, was the issue of public financial management being a major cause of domestic arrears. So in your work at the NESG, supporting governments, what's your take on public financial management, and what is it that we can do differently to address these issues?
Well, I think there's no doubt public financial management can be a lot better than what it is now. And one of the thinking was again, you can look at expenditure management of government. I mean, if you look at your budget and you have a lot of your money on overheads and limited for capital projects, it worries you. So how can we be more efficient in what we do? At a point in time when the government was talking about single account, the expectation was that, okay, fine, it's not like you're going to put all within the office of the AG. The expectation was that before government goes to borrow, and they will look at all the accounts that flow around the department and they'll be efficient in the management of their treasury. Because that's what private sector people do. You look at the entire treasury and you're not going to be allowing one part of it placing money at 5% when another part is borrowing money at 15-20%. So there's a need to be more efficient in how they use it, but unfortunately, everything is, you don't have a bottleneck. Everything is in one office, you need to write to one person and get it. That again delays payment, and like you had, if a contractor knows that he's not going to get his money on time, what does he do? He prices it up. So there's a lot of efficiency. I mean, I've always believed that effective use of ICT and have the right skill in place, you'll be more efficient. But effective management connotes the fact that there is a willingness to actually manage. Because sometimes I don't believe it's about lack of not knowing what to do. It's about, what you want to do. It's, so a lot can be done. And our work with them is to ensure that beyond revenue and driving revenue, we must deal with the quality of expenditure and how the revenue is managed. And I always tell people we are merely advisors to support us. We can implement. But our job as NESG is to keep at it, keep talking about it, and we will keep them keep talking about it.
Okay, thank you very much. We have about 13 minutes before the end of this session, so I'll open it up now. I will take a maximum of 6 questions. So let me start with my friend, where we stopped the last time. So we take the questions and then we ask the panelists to address them.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. My name is George Mwakutimin. I work for Shell. My question originally was meant for Bismarck, but I will give it to the IMF for our country rep. I think one of the issues you talked about in your earlier presentation was when you were talking about downside, response to downside risk. And you talk about further is a function of how the strength of the balance sheet in terms of banking sector vulnerability. Now, in recent past in Nigeria, we've seen the central bank increasing the loan deposit ratio from 60 to 65%. Now, given the structure of the economy and the nature, the way that borrowing rates and default rate has happened in the past, do you think the pressure that the CBN is trying to put on the banks will lead us into the situation we had in 2008, where NPS went up overboard? Because in an attempt to meet CBN debt or the CBN guideline of 65%, the banks are likely going to be given to companies that naturally will not have passed their credit test. Thank you.
Okay. Well understood. Next question, yes? I'll come to the other side.
I'm Tunde Keshiro from the Seaport Terminal. I'm working for PTML. My question is to Dr. Jumake. Actually, the excitement in your presentation has to do with process improvement. Against the background of the benefits, I've seen the impact in the industry within the regime of private sector involvement. I want to recall in 2017, PBEC intervened and brought the issue of ease of doing business to the port. And thereafter, to date, we're basically my concern for our own economy that is import dependent, how the process improvement has been able to scale down in terms of the use of scanners, particularly even to stress this, because it's very common to hear the trading public talking about the cost of importation and the cost of doing business in the port without getting to appreciate the impact of the process aspect of the job. So I'm very concerned how you are reacting to this. And equally, stressing this further, getting to see the same process improvement in valuation of used vehicles, taking into consideration the number of quantity of vehicles being imported to this country and how this is impacting the cost of the trade. And equally, the process of handling of abandoned overtime cargo in the port. Because it's very common for people to talk about their proper gridlock without looking at how the management of space and the inefficiency in it is impacting on cargo evacuation and the related activities. So I want to know PBEC's position on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll come to you. Sorry, I need to try and take from another table. Yes, I'm now listening.
Good morning, Revon from Standard Chartered Bank. So I think the presentations are sort of very, very optimistic and sort of we need to continue to clearly invest in Nigeria. But if we look at the capital importation numbers for the last 3 years, I think 2017 was about $12 billion. 2018 it went up to about $16.8 billion, and for the first 3 quarters this year, I think the reported number is about $20 billion. But if you look at the breakup across FDI's portfolio investment and others, in 2017, about 55% of it accounted for portfolio investors, of about $7 billion. Last year, the contribution by portfolio investors increased to about 70%. When we are sitting at the first 3 quarters, it's about 75%. Clearly, this money that comes in on portfolio investors is generally what we would call short-term money. FDIs have hovered at about $1 billion over these 3 years. So if we are putting in these perspectives, we've improved in terms of ease of doing business over the last so many years. Why is this not being reflected in FDI's inflow? Why is it still at this $1 billion number, which is actually appalling for a country of this size? And my other concern is these portfolio investors, when they went out in, I think, 2008, 2009 or 2010, we saw huge moves in currency. It went from, I think, 80 to 150 naira to the dollar. Is there any potential risk in a repeat of that?
All right, thank you. Yes.
Well, thank you. My name is Frank Aibogun. I work with Business there. And my comments are directed at Dr. Jumoke. One of the things that we must do is, there are very difficult things that we have to do. And I'm sure that people will understand when we're dealing with those difficult things. As Taiwo said earlier, there are those things that are low-hanging, and maybe at some point we may have exhausted all of them. What I worry about is losing the gains that we make. And I speak specifically about Apapa. I go to Apapa 4 or 5 times every week. Between March and, I could say, August, it would take me about 35-40 minutes to go to Apapa from Ikoyi or Victoria Island. And we all welcomed the improvement. I was always very skeptical because I kept asking, what have they done? Will they sustain it? And then suddenly in the last 2 months, it takes me now 3 to 4 hours to get to Apapa. Every day I try to go to Apapa. And once again, I can be called as I'm here now and I'm told, please don't come today because it's impossible. And I'm asking myself, a simple question of traffic management. Why should that define a nation? Thank you.
Thank you. We feel the pain. We feel the pain. Yes.
Hi, Libby George with Reuters. I'm curious, my question is somewhat related to what the gentleman from Standard Chartered raised. You see these improvements in ease of doing business, But when we speak with businesses and we ask people how things are going, they don't seem particularly optimistic and they seem frustrated. So I'm curious if you think that the ease of doing business is being, improvement in the rankings is being felt by real businesses in Nigeria? And if not, why not? And what you can do to improve that?
All right, thank you. I'll go to the other side of the room now. Please pardon me. And I'll have to take more than the original 2 I promised. So we now have to have more than 6 questions. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Folakemi Fasabi. I'm in risk management. One comment I have is to Dr. Jumoke as well, and it's concerning, there have been comments about the government expenditures and the revenue challenges that we have. But, you know, in terms of our cost profile, obviously we have a cost profile that's unsustainable. And I really do think, having worked in the public sector for quite a while, that there's a lot of room to improve things in that area. I don't know if you're aware right now, there's a public hearing going on, organized by the Senate, and they're reviewing the Public Procurement Act. And I think it's something that your committee needs to really be involved in, because I think there's some significant areas for improvement and tightening in that regard. My second comment is, I see that Bismarck has already left, but he made a comment that we can't really progress so significantly if we look back on what's happened, if we try to do what China did 20 years ago. And I agree with his comments on education, because we really need to educate our people differently in order to skill them up for the 21st century. But similarly, I think China is doing one thing today, which tends to get overlooked when people talk about the fact, oh, they're not in double-digit growth, they're now single digits, etc. They've taken a huge mass of people out of poverty. Furthermore, they've actually changed their strategy, which is to look inwards, to develop a significant domestic market. So in as much as, yes, there are concerns about border closure, but you know, in every crisis, in every situation, there's also room for opportunity. So I would suggest to take a look at, you know, what we can do to boost not only our demand, but our productivity as a result of these closures. Thank you.
All right, so I have so many hands up.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Dr. Tibitoko Shikoya. I used to be the Director of Economic Research at the African Development Bank. I think Dr. Jumoke said something earlier, that economists, sometimes you don't know what is. And I think I agree with her. I read economics, but I also read law. What I realized about economists, especially market intelligence economists in Nigeria, is the way we take religion in this country. We take things to the extreme. We take things to the extreme. Clueless economists who call themselves market intelligence economists. I'm surprised. I'm sorry that Bismarck left earlier, but because I wanted to bring this when he was here. Clueless economists think that free market, is the only thing that will drive economic growth and so on. It's not true. There is nothing like free market economics. Nothing like that. Take any economics textbook, especially microeconomic textbook. It starts with perfect competition, and then it goes all the way why perfect competition doesn't work. And what needs to be done to bring you closer, not to have perfect competition, but to bring you closer. Unfortunately, when you look at the largest economies in Africa, coming back to the IMF report, if you look at the statistical section of the report, you can see with only 8 countries, you can explain what is happening in Africa. The largest economies, what I call the same, and also resource-intensive economies. South Africa, Angola, Nigeria, possibly, and Egypt. Look at the average growth rate, less than 2%. Less than 2%. And even the projected growth rate with the IMF over the next few years is also less than 2%. But look at what I call the rest. Rwanda, Ethiopia, Senegal, Tanzania, the average growth rate has been over and above 7% in general. The key thing at the end of the day, if you look even in the IMF report, is not macroeconomic policy. It is institutional governance. It is institutional governance. Even in those countries, you realize that their private investment as a percentage of GDP is much higher than that of Nigeria that is supposed to be a free market economy. We have serious problem of institutional governance. We should address them.
Okay, so thank you. So I'll prefer we just ask questions directly because of our time. Okay, let me come here. Yes, come to the young lady.
Just a quick one, sir. And my question is for Marty. So I just need his perspective on what the Nigerian economy will be in 2020. I mean, in terms of outlook. And what do you think will drive the economy?
Okay, sorry, I have to try and go around the room. Yes, please.
I'm looking for the answers.
Thank you. My name is Ojigo Uche. I'm from Budget Foundation. My question is for Dr. Duboli. So you've mentioned that the PEPEC's role is to improve the environment, the business environment, with the aim ultimately to increase investment from local and international partners. So the question really is, what's the conversation that is happening right now with the investment, the entrepreneurial space around the border closure, and what is PEPEC's kind of discussion with the fears that different people have, especially people who are reliant on imports from imports or exports from our local neighbors. Thank you.
Alright, thank you. So I have 9 questions already. I'll take only one more, and it shall be 10. Interestingly, this was a presentation by IMF. But the questions are now for PEPEC. All right.
Yeah, my name is Anthony Saibra and I report for Bloomberg. My question is directed at Amin. We've seen short-term yields, basically real yields, really short-term yields negative. The stock market has destroyed more value in the last 10 years than given value. And then we have short-term yields going negative. What vulnerabilities do you see exposing the economy being exposed to with this situation we're facing now?
All right, I apologize, I will not be able to take more questions. We already are out of time. So because we have most of the questions for Dr. Jumoke, I'll start with Ami.
That's fine, although I thought I saw quite a few from the IMF, but that's always fine. All I know is every time we talk about the regional report, we end up on Nigeria, but it's because we are in Nigeria, so it's normal. And Nigeria, as Dr. Jumoke was saying, as Nigeria goes, so does Africa. So let's talk about some of the questions on monetary policy. The first one was on the loan-to-deposit ratio increased to 60%, 65%. When, yesterday the central bank issued its monetary policy communique and reported that loans have increased by 1.1 trillion naira, and NPLs were down to 6% during that time frame. Our view, which we expressed in the past, was this is a new regulation that has come into play and may need to be revisited or looked at in terms of potential pressure on NPL, asset quality, on the funding structure, and also remember the central bank wants to, and its main mandate is to keep price stability, which we agree with. And at some point, to reach that price stability,
it will also need to mop up some of the liquidity, and for that needs to be mopped up using CBN bills or through other means. But if it has to use CBN bills or those instruments, then at the end, the people buying are going to be banks, particularly after the latest regulation. And here you're going to see a possible conflict. Are they going to be lending more, or are they going to be buying government securities? And I think that reflects one question that I think we need to step back a bit, is why is the central bank mopping up, or why is there the liquidity? And here, this is why I always want to step back and say, it's not just one policy, it's really a package of measures. Fiscal has to deal small, then there's less financing needed, then there's less need to issue bonds or issue bills. That creates space in the bank's balance sheet for them to lend, right? So it's a package, it's not just a monetary policy issue. Coming back to the last question on what happens with short-term yields and negative. You know, this has come about because of the central bank regulation that has basically forbidden non-bank financial institutions for going into OMOs. That is just re-establishing something that used to be in the past, and by the way, it's quite common in many central banks. Now, what we have seen is that real yields have become negative in that particular market. In this case, what are the risks? Well, the risks are possible pressure on inflation and possible pressure, you know, it may increase lending, but that will also put possible pressure on imports and on the exchange rate. Hence, why we keep mentioning the importance of keeping a tight monetary policy to try to keep inflation in check. And I think that's the message in that. Now, there was a more general question on capital importation numbers and what's happened. So yes, I mean, we've seen that carry trade is important here in Nigeria today. I mean, look, if you were to talk to foreign investors today, there are probably three markets in terms of carry trade they look at: Nigeria, Ukraine, and Egypt. And why? Because the yields are very high on short-term instruments. And what can change that perspective when you're talking about FDI? I mean, you know, doing business is part of it, but you know, a lot of those countries, and you know, Yaounde talked about them. If you were to look at what is needed for the FDI, and I think Reuters also had this question, is, well, you know, a right macroeconomic environment on stability is needed as a prerequisite. Of course, you're going to need the right reforms. You know, I can just name three: that power, governance, doing business, part of it. But that's going to take that. And then the certainty of policies. And by the way, everything that I talked about are part of the government's economic recovery and growth plan. And it's a question of some of those actions being implemented. You know, we have a finance bill which we think are goes in the right direction. But then if you talk to investors, what are they asking? Is like, okay, this is the finance bill for this year. What's happening in the next years? So what are the policies that are coming? And I think announcing, you know, the ERGP has going 6 to 15% on the tax front, on the revenue front. So what investors are asking is, how is the government going to get there? What are the policies? And I think as that builds confidence, some of those investors are coming in. And you know, we've seen it in other countries where, you know, Egypt went into some of the reforms. FDI today has increased considerably. Actually, growth, I mean, gentlemen left, but growth is actually more than it's about 6% or more now. So I think, you know, that investor perception could change. And some question on the outlook for 2020. Under current policies, our outlook for 2020 is that growth for Nigeria will increase from 2.3 to 2.5%. And that will continue to be driven by oil production staying higher. You know, today we're at 2.05, but going to 2.05 or 2.10 million barrels a day. Agriculture growing at 2.5 to 3%, and then some pickup in non-oil economy. But again, still with, given what we have seen so far on private sector activity picking up, we are still have a non-oil economy that will be growing at 2% or slightly less. So I think that is under current policies. Under more reform implementation, that story will change.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your questions and for your interest in the work of the PEBEC. Tunde Keshinro, the use of scanners. So we've been working on, it's not rocket science, but working on getting scanners has been more of a people challenge than an infrastructure challenge. So trying to get the alignment, first of all the awareness, as Bismarck spoke about and a number of people have noted. Yes, the awareness is there, trying to get the urgency and the collaboration proved a bit of a challenge. I've been working on scanners since the inception of PEBEC 2016. Which agency, Customs, should buy the scanners? We wanted to have a national trading platform and make it a private sector initiative driven by NSIA. So with Ministry of Transport and Ministry of Finance, with NPA and Customs, because everybody had a plan. When we came on board, everybody had a different plan. So coalition and coherence was a history of why the use of scanners is still not done, but this year, I think late last year or early this year, there was the approval for the purchase of 3 scanners, and I believe if not deployed yet, they should be deployed very soon at Apapa Port. I can check the exact timing because I was with the Comptroller General on Monday, and we actually have been having a series of meetings on the single window, on scanners, on post community, on Apapa gridlock. So I don't have a specific time for you now, but I would want to urge you to not give up on getting what you need, because there's been a lot of work on getting it. Valuation of used vehicles, quality of used cars, handling of abandonment. So I think I'll just take all this together. The port reforms, trading across borders and trading within Nigeria. I can separate them into the 3 areas that I talked about. There's the people issues, so there's the agency coordination, there's the rent-seeking opportunities and the corruption, there's the inefficiencies that we've been working on. There's the processes, auditing the processes, removing number of documentation. For instance, as you know, from 14 pieces of documentation to import was reduced to 8, and export from 10 to 7. We've been working with all stakeholders in the ecosystem, and we went with the organization a number of times. I personally have been to Apapa ports a number of times. We're working with the Nigerian Customs Service in particular. They have an entire reform that they are implementing right now, e-customs. It's an entire comprehensive administration overhaul being driven by the Comptroller General, and we're going to give them the support that they need. There had been perspectives on how this should be done, and it took a bit of time within government to align, but I think all that is behind us now, and we're forging forward in the right direction. So all these things will be taken care of. Reband from Standard Chartered. Yes, we've had the portfolio investor risk. I think that the issues have been discussed extensively. I mean, just even spoke about them. Larry also spoke about them. It's the policy challenges. Investors are clear on why long-term investment is not coming in as it should. Some is coming in, and I like to remind audiences that it's not where it should be, but quite a bit is coming in. in a lot of areas, some of the slides I put up. I think it has a bit to do with also our communication, telling our own story and how we sell our economy. I think that is actually where the work is, because there's a default into the negative, but the Nigeria story is actually less negative than it tends to be portrayed. And quietly, people do realize that and come in. So investment continues to come in, and I expect the confidence, the government signaling through the policy issues, a lot of larger investments wait for that. That is just the behavior of sophisticated capital. But a lot of less sophisticated capital, more the SME space, more adventurous capital continues to come into the economy. Frank, I feel the pain. You know how we've worked on this. It's a systemic challenge, and I don't think there's any stakeholder that is fully exempt. The Apapa gridlock problem is a people one. Yes, there are challenges with infrastructure, the port, when it was built, the capacity compared to what it is now, some of the other structures around Apapa. We need rail more active there, opening up, and a lot of work is going on, you know that. It's difficult, I talked about it already, making sure that your reforms are sustainable and that they don't unwind. So, without being pessimistic, it's not going to be a case of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, because we just have to keep, first of all, corruption fights back, and indiscipline fights back. So you can't afford to take your foot off the pedal or the car grinds to a halt. So we will not. The Vice President will not. We've been having more meetings. It's not by accident the timing of the spike. It's also the timing of the peak of the season. We have similar challenges with the airports, more escalations of irate passengers sometimes, but the efficiencies are coming gradually and steadily. Consequence management is key, discipline is key, tracking is key, accountability and responsibility is key, and those are the things that we continue to push for. So we don't intend to lose the gains. Even if they slip temporarily, we will continue to forge ahead. It's the peak season for Apapa, and so that's why it's also, it's a yearly challenge, but we need to solve it permanently. You know the infrastructure work that has been going on and continues to go on. You know the road repairs that have been done, and a lot of the Minister of Transport is expediting the access to rail, which will significantly, and trying to use barges also in the area. Anyway, we can take it offline, but there's quite a bit being done. Levy, George, I think sometimes there's a lag in feeling the impact, but when I started the presentation, we're always careful to say that. The mandate of the PEVEC is twofold. So the visible aspect is the rankings, but that's not actually my core work. So I have a technical team that works almost on autopilot on the doing business reforms. We have the action plan, which agencies, taxation, business incorporation. So there's a cycle for DB, and it's easier to work on that because it's following the lifespan of a small and medium-sized enterprise from incorporation to insolvency. It's a shallower sort of intervention. It's 190 countries, so it's looking at cost and time of doing business and then transparency. So it's quite a systemic, empirical activity that a competent technical team of young consultants can push. What they need from my end is the political will and pushing that to. The real work is with our regulatory reforms, pushing things with our legislative interventions, and for the impact to really be felt, it takes a lot of strategic communication. So we've implemented over 140 reforms, but I meet people every day that do not know the reforms that were implemented in 2017. We're on social media a lot. We speak almost daily, and I mean members of the PEBEC, the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, the Vice President, the President, all sorts of other government people. But still, it's a big country, there's a lot of noise. You have to keep in the detail of demonstrating. So what we do, I alluded to that, the subnational tour, we basically have taken a strategic approach of going to the young entrepreneurs and speaking to them. So we started, but in 2020 we'll be prioritizing 4 demographics, 4 sectors: the agribusiness community, the creatives, the tech, and the light manufacturing. That's really the bulk of where young Nigerian entrepreneurs are, and the response has been really good already. They need to know about the reforms and use them. So I think there's a bit of a lag between reform implementation and actually them knowing the reforms and being able to use them and then helping us make them better. Falakemi, good to see you. Thank you for the comments. Mr. Shikoya has left. Thank you for the comments. Ojugo from Budget Foundation. Yes, I mean, just picking up from what I was saying to Lebi, we've been having the discussion with SMEs, and you'll be amazed at how many, it goes to actually the competitiveness and the competition and the protectiveness or otherwise that Bismarck was talking about before he left. To be honest, when I go out into states and I'm talking to SMEs, they're thanking me for the border closure. They're not upset about the border closure, which was Falakemi's point about the opportunity. They feel that they have a breather from the onslaught of imports that are more competitive, price competitive, and the smuggling. But it can never be a permanent fix to doing the hard work of becoming a productive and competitive economy. So I suspect that your concern was about businesses that work across the region and need to export or import their goods. Those are much larger businesses, and we're working with them. But the majority, the bulk, the target of this intervention is SMEs, and they are actually breathing a sigh of relief that for how short a period of time, you're getting testimonials that for the first time, all their stock is gone, and but I'm telling them that this is actually the time to improve your productivity, to capture your market, to value add and to scale up, so that when the borders are reopened or even further, when AFCFTA is implemented, you're ready to compete because you can. I think that was my last question.
All right. So, yes.
Well, no questions to me, but I want to comment on a few things. And Oshkura is left. I'm not sure all of us today are saying free market like that. That's not what economists are saying. I mean, we all know that there is always an unseen hand that tries to adjust it. But we're saying that command structures can't work. That's what we're saying. And so, and I agree with him, institutional governance is a major problem. Because all of these things that we're talking about, and sometimes I pity Jumoke, it's a matter of institutional governance. Simple. You can talk grammar, you say people are not feeling, we don't know. When people feel it, they are the one that will talk for you. It's not what you go out there and tell people. People want to feel it, and they will be your apostles. It's very important. So I agree with him, institutional government is a major matter, and until we get it right, all of these are what, I mean, you talk about competitiveness. My simple learnings talk about the indices for competitiveness, from basic to market to factor endowment. Institution is part of it, so we need to take it seriously. So that's the point. The first question that George asked was about now that CBN is saying do 60% to your 65 to your loan to your deposit ratio. You know, I just laughed. I said, when I started banking in Nigeria, we were doing those sectorial lending stuffs. It didn't work. I mean, I tell banks, it's good to listen to central bank, but when you finish your capital, your balance sheet, you're out. So you need to apply wisdom in carrying it out. And people make it to see as if banks don't want to lend. Banks must care about recovery. Simple intermediation role is that you take money from the surplus sector and you give it to the deficit sector. But there is always an assurance of what? Repayment. If those assurances are not there, you can legislate it, you can force it, and some of the things that are making things difficult are all these things we're talking about. The environment, the factor. I mean, and when Standard Chartered was talking about now 20 billion, 75% is portfolio investment. I used to be a trader, right? I would trade in Nigeria. I'm sure FX is stabilized, nobody wants to talk the rate, interest rate is high. But you know, listening to the debate about OMO, I get a bit afraid. Part of the work I was part of those that established the OMO desk in Central Bank, right? It was purely a tool to manage liquidity internally. Foreigners were not even allowed to get in there. In fact, before you buy short end, you can't buy below 1 year. That's you can't buy. Now we're saying, okay, domestic people don't buy, foreigners will buy because we want to keep portfolio investment. At what price? It's a matter for us to know the cost of OMO management. So these are the issues we talk about, which there are basic ways to running it. Portfolio investors, if they go now, are we prepared? I think we need to ask Central Bank. Our reserve still looks very good. I mean, we'll begin to say the structure of the reserves and looking at what really is the reserve. So that, you know, there's basic economics, and like Bismarck said, if you don't follow these basic economics, they tend to come back and haunt us. So my view is that we should do the big good work to have good FDIs, not portfolio investment. These guys are discerning, they know it, and once you do it, the money will come. Nigeria economy is big enough to attract, but institutional governance, the tone at the top, in terms of policy direction, in terms of policy consistencies, are so important to ensure that we have this money. And this money goes everywhere, and we shouldn't lose it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on that note, we'd like to appreciate our speakers, Mr. Ami Mati, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, for all the difficult questions you had to deal with, and then our brother, Mr. Laoye Jayola. Let's appreciate them, please. And to you for being a wonderful participant. Let's appreciate ourselves. And with this, we have come to the end of this session. The next item on the agenda is tea, coffee, and networking. So please do not go. Network with yourself. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
This one? Yeah, he left this one.
All right.